Connecting to the recording service. Okay, I think we're recording. So I'm just going to do a kind of formal introduction. Hello, everyone. This is Jen Whetham from the Washington State Board of Community and Technical Colleges, and I'm the program administrator for faculty development. And I met all of you at the New Faculty Institute exactly 1 month ago. And today is our first follow-up convening online. And welcome. So I have prepared some answers to questions that you submitted to me via a Google form. So I've organized them and sorted them, and I'm going to try to move through the answers and then give us time to ask follow-up questions. And it looks like I just wanted to recognize that Pam from Whatcom is here, and Kelly Callahan from Bellevue is here. And we also have Tawny and Tawny Townsend, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, from Everett. And so welcome. And then we also have Jessica from ACS, who is live captioning this event. And I'm just going to post in the chat window one more time. If you want to watch the live caption, then you can watch that. So this will be I'm nervous about this, but this will be recording every single word I say, and every word that you say. So on this document, I collected the questions, and the first question from one of the participants was meeting time. Can we meet Friday? And I would be delighted to consider meeting Friday. I've found that typically Thursday afternoons around this time are the best time for most faculty.
Kelly Callahan has joined the meeting.
Welcome, Kelly. Hello.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
Yeah, well, welcome. So I'm just starting to address some of these questions, and I'll just say that in the chat window, I've posted a link to a Google Doc that has all the questions on it and some initial answers just to keep myself on track. And if you want to take a look at the live stream, there's another link that will take you to the live stream, so you can see every word I say as I say it. And so I was just addressing this first question. A participant asked if we could meet on Friday, and so I'm going to be sending a Google poll to this group and just try to figure out if Thursdays at 2 works for most people, or if we did meet on Friday, if that would be better. So I can try to rearrange some of the dates. I'm just wondering if we could all mute ourselves. And actually I'll go through and mute people. And if you want to ask a clarifying question or say something, you can just raise your hand or type into the chat window, and I'll address that question. So for Friday, I'm going to do a little follow-up about meeting on Fridays. And the first couple questions about classroom instruction I thought were really, really interesting. And so I have a question from a practitioner about my concern is how to plan the calendar when I have never taught. I think that's a great question, and I'm really excited to provide some resources. A second question, any best practices for getting students to be wide awake and attentive for early morning classes? Another super great question, and I've put together a few resources around that. And then a very specific question that I thought was really interesting, is it normal to feel like you're not a successful teacher unless you ensure the lab portion of the class takes up all the time it's allotted every time your class meets? So I reached out to a faculty member in the system who I know and trust to get some feedback on that. So in response to that first question about planning the calendar, I'm going to go back to a concept called backwards design. And I've given you 2 books here. One is called Building a Pathway to Student Learning, and another book is called Watermarks, and it's a primer for full-time and adjunct faculty. So I think right away, if you're interested in doing a deeper dive into backwards design, those 2 books are really great. And then I've also provided 2 links on backwards design that might be useful in the short term. And rather than sort of looking at the more technical things, I thought I would give what I hope, Pam, is a very practical response to this question, because I too struggled with this when I was a new teacher. So my thought is that I would get some kind of document, and if you are electronic, if you think better electronically than a Word document or a spreadsheet, and I know some people actually use big hard copy calendars and then they get out Post-it notes. So I think there's lots of ways to backwards design depending on how you operate. Like if you're a kinesthetic learner, getting a really big calendar and some Post-it notes might be kind of fun. But I typically did do this kind of thing on a Word document. So then what I would do is I would map out the weeks you have to teach. So typically I would look at the instructional calendar on my campus's website. So I would look at the instructional calendar and say, okay, the first date of the quarter is this, the last day is this, finals week is this, and I would create weeks. And I would typically map out like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday for each week, and I'd put specific dates on those, and then I would map out any holidays. Like you have the Thanksgiving break, fall quarter, winter quarter, you have President's Day. So I would, I'd sort of just try to template out when I would be teaching, like how many instructional days I had with students. And I did put a little note in here. It took me a couple years of teaching to figure this out, that fall quarter is 12 weeks to teach 10 instructional weeks. So you actually have kind of, with the Thanksgiving break, and I think there's a couple other reasons, but you typically have around 12 weeks to teach 10 weeks of instruction. And then winter quarter, it's a little bit shorter. Like I think you have maybe 11 weeks, and there's a couple days off in winter quarter. There's Presidential Monday. And then spring quarter is really tight because it's actually 10 weeks of instruction in 10 calendar weeks. And so that always, like for my first couple years of teaching, I was like, why am I so tired? It's spring quarter. Why is spring quarter so, fast? And it's because winter quarter, you've just had that little extra time. So what I would do after I'd sort of mapped out how many instructional days I had, I would first think about my learning outcomes. And I was in an English department, so my English department had determined my outcomes for me. So I'm not sure if you have to write your own outcomes, or if you have industry-specific outcomes if you're in workforce, or if your department has given you outcomes, or if you get to just design your own. But that's the first thing I do, is think about the 4 to 5 really big things I want students to know and be able to do by the end of the quarter. And then I would think about my landmark assessments for those outcomes. So I'm just going to add something to the Google Doc for Jen teaching English & 101, which is basic introduction to college writing. I had a final portfolio at the end, and then 3 essays. So I would think about those and how they aligned with my learning outcomes. So the final portfolio would assess some of the global outcomes. In essay number 3, I was focusing on 1 or 2. In essay number 2, I was focusing on 1 or 2, and so on and so forth. And then I would put those into the schedule, and I would think about how long the students needed for each assessment. So for me, I typically taught 3 weeks for each essay, and then at the end of the quarter, they'd have a week of revisions for that final portfolio. And I'm just trying to think of what else I would want to say about this. So, for example, for the first week would be, and I tried to make sure that we were doing kind of the same things in 3-week cycles, so the students could get used to what we were doing. So the first week we do drafting activities just to help them get ideas about what they would write their papers about. And then the second week we would do revision activities like peer review. And that required a separate sub-assignment and a couple days because I thought peer review was really important. And then I'd schedule in a one-to-one meeting with me, thinking about, I didn't know about the 4 connections at that time, but I always it was mandatory to come and bring your paper to me in my office, and I would give you feedback on it. And I did this when I was adjunct faculty and when I was full-time faculty. And then I would do a revision activity with scissors and tape where they would like cut their papers apart and look for the focus paragraph, and then they'd reorganize it, and it was playful and fun. And then my final thought was, like Bob Moorbacher was telling me that one of his faculty members said that her favorite part of teaching was designing like this because it's perfect. And then once you get it into the hands of real students, you're like, oh, I paced that way too fast, or oh, they did not need 3 days for peer review. Next time we can do it in 2. So my schedule was always subject to change if my students needed more time or less time. And I will say that one quarter when I had been teaching probably 7 years at the time, I was teaching a new class and I paced it way too fast and way too heavy and did way too much content. And I just had to start over, like with the students. Like we had to completely stop the whole class and start over because it was just too fast. So I'm going to stop here and ask if there are any questions. Or any comments, or Pam, was that useful to you at all?
Yes, that was very useful. And okay. I found I did a lot of that already.
Oh, good.
So that was good to know, but I want to look into those books then, so thank you very much.
Oh my gosh, I'm delighted. And isn't it great to know that your instincts were right on?
Yes.
Isn't it great to know that you were just on the right track? I also wanted to say that if you find those resources useful, definitely let me know so I can keep recommending them. And if they are not useful to you, please let me know because I don't want to keep recommending them if they're not useful.
Okay, I'll do that.
Thank you. All right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next question, which is about student attention. And I wanted to say that I think there's 2 ways to sort of think about student attention. And so one is the teacher side, which is, like what can you do as a teacher in terms of your instructional methods? And then there's also the student side, right? Because you can be, like doing cartwheels in front of the classroom, but there are things that students can be doing as well. So my first thought is that I found this interesting. It's a little snippet of some research on student attention that I think would be useful. Like it sort of talks about the whys and hows of student attention. And there is but then what do you do about that? Like we all know that, students have varying degrees of attention. So what do you do in the case of that? And there's a new book called Small Teaching, Everyday Lessons from the Science of Learning. And my friend Pat Hutchings is, a pretty master teacher, and she's also a national expert. And I was asking her, like, so Pat, what'd you read this summer? And she was like, oh my gosh, I was reading Small Teaching. She was like, it's a page turner. I just can't put it down. And I just had to laugh. So this book is about small tweaks you can make to your teaching right away. And again, it's based in science, the science of learning. And again, sometimes it's just about making small tweaks to your instructional design that are really going to make a big impact on student attention. I also included this link. It's from K-12, so there's a little disclaimer here that keeping kids engaged, like some of this is silly, right? Like some of this is just not going to work for a college environment with returning adult students. But some of it might be actually really useful. And I thought it might be, like one thing I would consider is is just looking at that article and thinking about, is there anything in here that could be useful for my practice? So K-12 has a ton of research on teaching, and I think a lot of times, even though it might be a little, some of the things don't transfer, some of the things do. So I would recommend checking out that article and just seeing. On the other side, if you have a class with a lot of running START students in it, the first article that I posted, it's very playful. Like one of the things is like, keep your refrigerator stocked with Red Bull. So, so you definitely want to be, it might be too playful for your teacher persona, if you are more serious, or, you just, and which is totally fine. Or if you're, but if you have if you have a lot of returning students, they might be like, listen, I don't need a refrigerator full of Red Bull. I need more practical things. But there are some pretty good strategies in there that could be useful. And also it sort of calls attention to this notion of attention in a helpful way, rather than being like, everybody needs to be paying attention. You can be like, hey, I thought we might talk a little bit about paying attention. Do any of these strategies seem helpful? And then also you could say, listen, I don't mind if you doodle, if that helps you stay focused. And there's another one in there about like asking lots of questions, and you could be like, I love it when you ask questions. So, like I would really recommend that as a strategy. How do you students feel about that? And I found one that's a little bit more formal, and especially for people who lecture. This one is about staying focused during a lecture. And my advice is that you don't, like, I talk to so many faculty who are like, well, I put this article in, I put these resources into the Canvas shell and the students didn't read it. Or I put this in, I told the students to read this article and they didn't read it. So my advice is to ensure that you actually discuss this with your students and listen to their feedback and their ideas. So like what seems like it would work, and even if you wanted to adopt one of the strategies that we tried at the New Faculty Institute, like what are you willing to try? What are you willing to commit to? If you're having trouble paying attention, like during the lecture, like if you're bringing your laptop ostensibly to take notes and you find yourself just like constantly surfing the web, is this something you're willing to commit to, like trying to take notes a different way? And then the other thing that you might want to think about is using an article like this to establish attention norms for the group. So, so if you're discussing this as a class, maybe there's certain things that collaboratively you're all willing to commit to, like where no one's going to bring a laptop unless they're really going to take notes. So those are just a few thoughts that I had about student attention. And I don't know if that person is on the call right now, but if you are, or if the people who are on the call, do you have any thoughts about this? Does this seem useful or like something you might try? Okay, so I don't think we have any comments or feedback, but I hope that was useful. And if the person who asked this question is commenting, is going to watch this later, I hope that you might give me some feedback about that and let me know if any of these resources were useful. So the next question, oh, Kelly said definitely useful. Thank you. Hey, Kelly, thanks. I'm so glad. I tried to put in a span of things like scholarly things and serious things and some playful things. There was one other thing that I wanted to say about this. I'm so sorry. I'm recording this in a cubicle, and I'm worried that the recording is picking up her conversation. So I'm just going to take one quick second and just speak over to her just really quickly. So excuse me for one moment. I'm just going to pause the recording. Okay, thanks. I just wanted to check in because this is life in cubicle land, my very glamorous life in a cubicle. So I wanted to say one more thing about student attention, and I think that there is a big difference between, sort of like what that article about the first article that I mentioned on the student side about the playful one about Red Bull. It definitely is written towards, I think, what is our typical understanding of college students. Like, I live in a dorm, I have a food plan, like maybe I work 10 hours a week with my work study. And that is not our student population. And so a lot of them are taking buses for hours to get to class. They're struggling with childcare, maybe food issue, like maybe they're working a full-time job just to get food on the table. Maybe they have like 3 kids. I mean, again, our students are dealing with tons and tons of issues that might make them tired and might make it hard for them to pay attention. And so I think, again, being really compassionate and really empathetic to those issues and really thinking about, like if a student is, maybe not getting enough sleep because they're, working many, many hours and taking a full-time load and, having kids, they have kids and all of those things. I think just being really compassionate and empathetic about that is really a beautiful way to be. I feel like I could have been more articulate about that point. I guess I was just thinking about if I could go back and do one thing differently in my own teaching, it would be to be more compassionate in my own practice for the realities of those students. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there, that I recognize that these sources are more four-year focused and they don't, and so I'll be looking for better resources on this about community college student populations. So the question about lab sciences, and I reached out to Lucas Myers, who's tenured biology faculty at Lower Columbia, to ask him, hey Lucas, how would you respond to this? He's a really great teacher and practitioner. And he says, yes, this is very normal. So for the person who asked this, I definitely want to stress this is super normal, especially with the common traditional quantity focus of the sciences. For each laboratory time, I try to just focus on designing with a purpose. Design the laboratory experiment, activity, etc. with a purpose for what you want your students to learn or gain. Sometimes that means it will take a lot of time, and sometimes it will be shorter. Both of those situations can be due to the fact that students are engaged and you are performing excellent facilitation. So that's reassuring. Learning is not about time slots or spaces, but instead about what they are doing and thinking. Therefore, if you design with a purpose and it ends up short, that's okay. Filling time and space for no purpose other than to fulfill the obligation is not beneficial. It takes time to get used to it, but just make sure to focus on designing with a purpose and the quality of the activity. Students know when we are just trying to fill time, and they tend to reduce their engagement. So Lucas, thank you. I was really grateful to Lucas for writing such a great answer. And I know that the person who asked this question was unable to be on the call today. And so I hope if you watch this recording later, if you have further questions, I can either put you in touch with Lucas or you can post your follow-up questions to the doc. And I will respond to them. Lucas will respond to them. And there's other science faculty in the system who might also have answers for this. So great question. Moving on, there were 3 questions around professional development, and I termed them professional development practical as opposed to professional development conceptual, which is coming up. So one person asked about tools. How can I learn about webinars, conferences, and other events? Another person asked about activities, like how do I get involved at the system level? And then finally, somebody asked a really astute question about best practices for onboarding and if the state board suggests any, or is it up to the college to determine those onboarding practices? So the first thing I'm going to talk about in terms of tools to find out events is the state board calendar. this is a pretty awesome tool. When I first got here, we did not have a statewide calendar, and you would be surprised, everyone knew, like how difficult it was to get a state level calendar up with all the system meetings for the councils and the commissions and the various professional development groups. And so now we have one. And when we overhauled the state board website. So if you click on the link in the Google Doc, that will take you to the Trumba calendar, and we try really hard to make sure that that is absolutely 100% up to date. So the state board calendar is a really great way to find out what's happening. Another way to find out what's happening is I've included a link to our assessment, teaching, and learning pages. And that too is a super great, well, I designed them, so I think they're super great. But, and in fact, what I might do really quickly is just move over to my monitor and show you these tools. So I'm just going to open link in a new tab. So can I just see in the chat window and just make sure that you guys can see my screen? Could you guys just type into the chat window real quick? Can you see what I'm seeing? Tani says yes. Woohoo! Okay. So as you can see here, this is the college system and state board calendar. And so you can look at it as a table, you can look at it as a list, and you can organize it by month so you can kind of see everything that's happening. And there's also a way to filter the calendars. So you can, like if you just want to see what is offered in e-learning, you can start to remove all of these things. You can just go down this very extensive list and just see what's happening with e-learning. And then down here, you can also filter by commission and filter by council. So if you want to see what WEC is up to, for example, you can just click, oh, I just learned something. You can just click on WEC and there it is. So if you want to see ARC and I recognize this is alphabeti soup, and I hesitate to overwhelm you with information when there's so much happening, but essentially there's a bunch of different system-wide groups. So WEC, for example, is all the workforce deans. So they have their own system-level group, and they get together and every quarter and talk about things that are important to workforce deans around the state. And they do a lot of really great system work that I'll be talking about in a little bit when I talk about, well, I'll be talking about that in just a little bit. So, so that is that. And then our assessment, teaching, and learning pages. So these are my office's pages, assessment, teaching, and learning. And so I have a little content here, and then I have, how to find out about our events. I have a link for our conference, which I'll be talking about a little bit later. And so here you can find out what my office is up to and how you can get involved. And then we also have our e-learning department our e-learning department also has a robust suite of professional development opportunities. And Alyssa Sells, who teaches the Canvas 101, is going to be doing our next meeting on the learning in e-learning. And then Jess Thompson, who teaches our Accessibility 101 course, The Basics of Inclusive Design, she's going to be leading a session for you building off of Alyssa to talk about accessibility and inclusive design. And then Bo-Young Che will be presenting to you in January on the miracle that is open educational resources. So that'll be super exciting. We also offer Quality Matters trainings, and this Alyssa will talk a little bit about this during her session, but essentially this is a set of best practices around online instruction and especially instructional design, and then you learn how to use this rubric that helps you make sure that your online class is really embodying the best of online learning. It's I've taken a lot of those trainings, and I find them to be really useful. I'm a peer reviewer for Quality Matters, and so I occasionally review online courses and give feedback. So anything you do with QM, I think, is highly useful, and especially if you teach online a lot. And then our Adult Basic Education Department is basic education for adults, and they offer a lot of different trainings. And so if you are adult basic education faculty, your dean knows a lot about these. They have a very robust council. So if you're interested, you can talk to your dean. Oh, and I see that possibly there is a question. So I am going to stop sharing for a sec and look. I just heard a noise. I just heard a noise from WebEx, so I'm wondering if somebody had a question. Go ahead if you had a question. Oh, maybe not. Maybe nobody had a question. So, all right. So just a few things to highlight here. I'll reshare my screen. I'll make sure I'm sharing monitor 2. Beta has a new teacher orientation, and they also have really great reading apprenticeship trainings. I think reading apprenticeship has been one of the most amazing things for me about best practices around teaching students how to read while you're teaching your content. So I highly recommend, so our Adult Basic Education program, a department, they offer a lot of really great instruction. And then we also have the Faculty and Staff of Color Conference. That's a statewide event, and so it's it's everybody. It's faculty, academic staff, student services staff, people from all over the organizations, any level who identify as being of color convene together, and and this is a safe space to really be with each other and learn from each other and network and really experience the sense of belonging and healing and safety that a lot of times our faculty and staff of color just do not experience in their institutions. So if you identify as being of color, I highly recommend this conference. I have never been, but I have only heard amazing things. We also have a Faculty of Color mentoring program, and I think some of you who attended New Faculty Institute are also enrolled in this. So this is also a really great program. So in terms of getting involved at the system level, I would really recommend that you come to the Spring Assessment Teaching and Learning Conference, and it looks like my link disappeared. So I want to get rid of this. There we go. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do this, SBCTC ATL conference. Now, we have not updated, when I say we, I mean I have not updated this yet, but it's typically that first week of May. This year it's going to be in Vancouver, not Spokane. And if you are on the ATL listserv, you're going to hear a lot about this. And I'll also be submitting to this group a very special invitation to, I'll send you the call for proposals and stuff about the keynotes and urging you to either present or register, or both. The other statewide group that I think is a really great way for faculty to get involved is called FACT, and this is the Faculty Association of the Community and Technical Colleges, and every college has one representative. So if you click on this link, it's going to take you to the FACT website, and every quarter they do a FACT Facts. Isn't that very clever? And they have a monthly meeting. This month it's going to be at Dumas Bay in Federal Way, October 6th to the 8th. And if you look here, you'll see the colleges, and you can click on the representatives, and you can see who your FACT representative is for your institution. And if your institution doesn't have a representative, then I would recommend that you contact the current president. His name is Jerry Smith, and maybe you'd like that to be you. Every college has its own selection process for the FACT representative, and if you're interested in knowing more, you could also just reach out to me privately via email, and I would be delighted to tell you more about FACT and how you could get involved. But a lot of times, if the state board needs faculty members to serve on a committee, then we ask FACT to identify a faculty member. So FACT is another really great way to get involved. And then my primary method of communication is this listserv, and I've included instructions on how to sign up in the Canvas shell, but I really recommend signing up for the ATL listserv. I try not to send too much email, but I think it's definitely helpful. And that's my primary way of communicating things. If people say, you know, hey, I'm running a free workshop on X, or it's just my primary method for disseminating communication about statewide events. There also is a listserv called the DEHPD listserv, and you met Vic Ball at the New Faculty Institute. This is another really great way to find out what's happening at the system level about events and really progressive, social justice oriented events. This is my favorite listserv. I love it. It's just an amazing network. It's also a really great way to find out about jobs. Like, people are really committed to spreading the word about professional development and also about new jobs. So this is a really great way, I think, to get tapped into that statewide community. It's powerful, it's vital, it's vitalizing, it's exciting. The final organization I just thought I would highlight here is the CTC LDA. They have, so their website is ctcleads.org, and this is professional development for people who want to move up in administration. So again, it's sort of like a y'all come kind of thing, but it's specifically about what does it mean to be a leader in our CTC LDA, in our CTC system. And you know, it's everybody from directors of programs to college presidents, and because of the things that they're talking about, a lot of faculty attend as well. And if you are interested in becoming a dean, I think this is a really great organization to be thinking about maybe attending some of their events. So if you click on that link, it'll take you to their conferences. Their fall conference in particular this year, I think, is going to be really spectacular. And that's my little teaser to get you to click on the link. The final question in this little segment is about onboarding. And I did want to clarify that we don't have specific resources to support the colleges in onboarding staff and faculty. And personally, I feel like that's a lack on our part. It's sort of an emergent conversation. I have been convening the professional developers and kind of offering professional development for professional developers at our ATL retreats. And I really recommend the 5-star consortium model, and I'll just add for adjunct faculty onboarding. And the work that these women have done is just amazing, and it's really inspired my work on the New Faculty Institute. So you met Peg and Sally at the New Faculty Institute. They were deeply involved in this, and so I think this is, to me, a best practice around onboarding, and not just for adjunct faculty. I went to 2 of the trainings, and I learned things even after I had been teaching 10 years, like nuances of FERPA, for example, that I had never picked up on before. My office does provide some support, like the New Faculty Institute, which you attended. We have a boot camp for professional technical faculty. And I mentioned earlier that list of beta offerings. So they have an onboarding for new directors. They have a CASAS cadre. CASAS is the test that they use for adult basic education. And we typically defer to the colleges, especially about in regards to the collective bargaining agreement, because again, there are certain things that we can do as a state agency, and then there's things that are oftentimes left best to local context. One best practice, and I forgot to cite her, one best practice is from Catherine Mahoney, who works here at the State Board. She's in our workforce department, and Mahoney, and I'll say SBCTC workforce. She has recently completed a master's degree in organizational leadership, and so she is my go-to on questions like this. And she recommended that possibly it would be a good idea to set up some time with your dean to ask about a buddy system. And this is a common onboarding practice that helps with a couple of critical pieces of onboarding. So for example, you might ask, like, what are our organization vision, mission, values, and strategies? And how do I fit into that as a faculty member in X department? They also can help you name the norms for the work area or for your division or your department, because there should be some norms around that. Also helping you identify resources and being willing to be a broker between new staff and a couple different gatekeepers. So for example, when you're a new person, sometimes IT can be a little bit difficult to navigate. So who should you talk to in IT when you have a problem with your computer? So again, just helping you out when you need to know, who do I go to about this? So two good resources to find out more about what to ask for if you did go to your dean and say, hey, I heard about this buddy system from the State Board. These links, I think, can tell you a little bit more about a buddy system and how that works. So I'd like to stop for a second and just ask if there's any questions or comments or thoughts. Any questions, any comments, any thoughts? I guess I did want to just ask, and you can type this into the chat. Can you, the Google Doc was sent out via email. Yes, absolutely. And Kelly, would it be useful if I posted that to the, would it be useful if I reposted it to the chat window? I'm doing it. I'm doing it anyway. I'm also wondering, okay, good. Kelly, that's great. I just did that for you. I did want to ask really quickly, how much is the noise from my office? Can you guys hear the noise in my office right now? Oh, good. Okay, Kelly said no. Okay, that's excellent. Yeah, next time I'll make sure I schedule a conference room. Oh, Pam, okay, you can hear just fine. Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to go down in the Google Doc to professional development conceptual. And so there was a question here. There were 3 questions that I thought were sort of asking similar questions. And one was, how much effort should I be devoting to professional groups specific to my discipline versus professional groups that are more focused around teaching and learning? And there's a concern that the discipline-specific ones will be more fulfilling personally, but the professional groups around teaching and learning might look better to a tenure committee. There's also a question around balancing. How do I grow as a good instructor and yet also move towards growing as a professional? And is it possible to move toward both directions and grow equally without, I think there's an implicit, well, this might slow down my growth as a teacher. So I wanted to address both of these at the same time. Well, I'll just start with the discipline-specific versus professional. I think that your tenure committee makeup is really going to, this is a very contextualized answer, because I think my tenure committee was very English-centric, and a lot of them were very focused on national discipline-specific groups. So I was very involved in the 4Cs, which is the Conference for College Composition and Communication, and they loved it. They had no problem. And also, from what I know about the discipline-specific groups in the discipline of biology and PE, they're all very, very, the ones that I know about are very pedagogy-focused. So sometimes there isn't actually a distinction. And I guess I would also say that in terms of professional groups focused on general frontiers in teaching and learning, I think some of the most interesting conversations in that are in discipline-specific groups. So you might not actually have to make the choice there. And I think this might, if you felt comfortable, this actually might be a question that you would want to ask your tenure committee. You know, like, hey, these are the discipline groups that I'm really interested in joining, and what do you think? So again, this is going to really depend on, I think this is going to really depend on your tenure committee, and you would probably still get a lot about teaching and learning from being involved in those discipline-specific groups. In terms of growing as a good instructor and gaining tools for the teaching process and moving towards being a professional, I thought that this resource, the Peak Performing Professor, would be an exceptional tool to use. And in this book, she lays out a really nice way to think about how you're going to do it all and how you're going to maximize your time to make sure that you're able to do everything. And I know that when we were planning for the New Faculty Institute, Bob Moorbacher and I had a little bit of a conversation about this, and that it's not necessarily, I mean, like you could read the book and do everything, but sometimes I would say it's also useful to trust your intuition about this, that if you're feeling really passionate about your teaching, commit to your teaching. If you're feeling really passionate about growing as a community college professional and some doors are opening for you in that regard, focus on that. I would say that depending on, in terms of what's more important for the first few years, my thought is that the teaching would be really more important for the first few years, while still making moves to be a good colleague and a good professional, but that typically for those of you in this population where you're new faculty, I would, people are going to treat you well because of that. They're going to want to include you, but they're going to be naturally cautious about how they include you because they don't want to overwhelm you and they do want to keep you. So, but I would say that yes, you can move towards both directions and grow equally because like let's just say that you are really interested in assignment design and assessment, then maybe you could also be on your assessment committee. So sometimes you could sort of kill two birds with one stone. So I'm going to stop for a second and I'm just going to ask if there are comments or feedback on that or questions. Any thoughts? All right, good. Okay, so I'm going to move on. And again, too, if you're listening to this recording later, if this was your question or if I said something that you disagree with or agree with or whatever, do feel free to just make a quick comment in the Google Doc or send me an email. I'm genuinely interested to know if this is useful. So, but I would recommend checking out the Peak Performing Professor for sure to get a little bit more nuanced definition about how to actually do both at the same time. There were some questions around workload expectations, and there was a question about outside roles and if those outside of the classroom and if that difference is recognized or rewarded in terms of teaching and salary. how active should I be in my first year outside of the classroom, and how many boards or committees do I recommend joining or being a part of to still have that work-life balance? So again, I'm going to really push the Peak Performing Professor. I wish I had had access to that book when I was just starting out. And she kind of points out that the people who are really, really good are really, really good, and yet they still have that work-life balance. And the people who are chronically disorganized, like Jen Whetham, who's facilitating this, that a lot of times that if one area of your life is in chaos, the rest of it is in chaos. And so she has some really good strategies so that you become one of those people who has it all, a robust work and a really great life balance too. So I started using that book a while ago, and I've found that I've been much more productive. Even though I'm no longer in the classroom, it's been useful. I also asked Richard Burton from AFT Washington, and you might remember him from the New Faculty Institute. And just because, especially about this question about how is that difference recognized or rewarded in terms of teaching workload and salary. And he did clarify that yes, that time outside really varies by program or department or division, and there are definitely salary and workload issues that emerge. So the starting point is 35 hours of full-time contact per week. And from there, other faculty programs and disciplines are categorized by student contact hour numbers. And he uses the term controversial and problematic, and he's absolutely right. They're controversial and problematic. We actually have a system work group working on this right now, to my understanding. So 15 hours a week is for transfer, 18 hours for others. Some professional technical programs put in 20 to 25 hours, and the rates vary by college. So, but the big thing that he really wanted you to know is that faculty in 15-hour programs are working full-time teaching 15 hours, and then the other 20 of their 35 total full-time hours are committee, grading, class prep. And a faculty in a 25-hour program spends 10 more hours in class and outside of class, and then they have to still fulfill that 35-hour full-time requirement. So this is an equity issue. I think this is something that people are starting to pay attention to, and the unions obviously have been paying attention to for a long time. So I'm really glad that he brought it to my attention. I mean, I knew about it, but I'm happy that we have a chance to kind of publicly say this, that it's really different. Also, if you're part of a big department, like I was always part of an English department, so there were always at least 15 full-time faculty, and then like when I was at Clark, there were 90 adjuncts, I think, a big number of adjunct faculty. So there's more people to do the work, as opposed to maybe if you're a department of 1 or a department of 2 or even 3, that then you're trying to do all the same work and have the same reach and capacity as a big department like English or math, but you have just fewer people to spread the work around. So again, this is a complex issue. There's no easy answers, but I wanted to say that in terms of the difference recognized or rewarded in terms of teaching workloads or salary, I would not say that. I would say that I'll just be a little cynical for a sec and say that when I was a faculty member, sometimes I felt like the only reward for good work was more work. So I really wanted to be careful about what I signed up for, because if you are a hard worker and you are, fun to work with and you have good ideas, you're just going to find that more and more people are going to ask you to do more and more work. And a lot of it is really exciting, and it's hard to choose. And that's where a book like The Teaching Professor, or the Peak Performing Professor is really useful, because she has you do some mapping and some goal setting and some sort of, who do you want to be, so you know what you can commit to. So for example, some of our faculty are really, really passionate about open educational resources. And so, becoming really skilled in OERs is a big time commitment, and it's intellectual labor, and it's fun, and it's exciting, and you're doing design, and you're learning about licensing, and it's really deep curriculum work a lot of times. So if that's going to be your passion, and you're really going to work on building something like WAMAP, which is Open Educational Resources for math, which one of our faculty members at Pierce, David Littman, he was like, gosh, there's no free open educational resources for math. I want to build that and share it with everybody I can think of to really help more students get access to high quality instructional materials. So obviously he can't be on 900 committees while he's doing that. So again, something like the peak performing professor, where you're thinking about what are going to be my passions and what am I really going to focus my time on. And remembering too what Bob Mortbacher said about working sometimes on a big college level project can be really formative for your professional development. So if I'm on my Guided Pathways committee, I'm going to learn a lot about guided pathways. I'm going to learn a lot about my colleagues and about different parts of the organization. But if I'm working on a big committee like that, I might not be able to do other things. I'm going to stop again and see if there's any comments or questions or thoughts. Not to put pressure on you. Okay. And if you're watching from home, or if you're watching this recording, definitely either post a comment on the Google Doc or email me, because I really would like this to be useful to you. The last question is about advising, and this is an excellent Guided Pathways question. I have to do advising in a discipline other than the one I teach in. Other than talking to the faculty, and it looks like there's only one faculty member in that discipline, is there anything I can do to get up to speed on advising in that discipline? I am worried about students slipping through the cracks due to poor advising. Should I ask for a different cohort of students to advise? I want to be helpful to the institution, but I feel like it's a double danger to students being put with an advisor not in their field and being put with an advisor who just arrived at the college. So Tom, I think you were going to join us today, and I haven't been looking at the, I don't know if you got a chance to join us, but I know you were maybe going to try to jump on late. But Tom, I just want to say, this is such a great question, and I'm so grateful to you for asking it. It's a brave question. And I asked Lisa Garcia-Hansen, who is our Student Success Center Director and the leader of our Guided Pathways Initiative, to talk about this, because in a Guided Pathways model, when faculty are advising students, a lot of times you are going to have to advise students who are not in your discipline area, and what to do about that is a rich problem of practice. So Lisa said that she can really sympathize with you on this. Also, I just wanted to add that she has a really deep and rich student services background, so she's done a lot of advising. So she said, I've advised as a generalist, and it can be really difficult to advise on specific areas outside of one's expertise. My first recommendation is that you talk with someone in the discipline, the basics, not the deep nuances. And Tom, I know that you talked about there's only one person in your at your school. So if you want to send me an email with the discipline that you're interested in, I could maybe do a little matchmaking for you about other people to interview as well. And I'm sure this person at your college could also give you some really good feedback. Lisa also recommends that you really recognize when a question or concern is beyond your knowledge base, and remember that no one can be expected to know everything about everything, so referrals should be your best friend. I love the way she said that. They should feel comfortable and be supported by your campus, so you should feel comfortable and be supported by your campus to redirect the student to the expert faculty member in that discipline who can answer those specific questions. She really wants you to be cautious about offering educated guesses rather than certainty. And if your campus has general advisors, you can also refer students to that general advisor because, again, they've been trained in general education and common college requirements, as well as general information on other programs. And she said they're also more likely to receive regular advising training and updates on program changes. So advisors and counselors are good referral sources when questions come up beyond coursework, so issues around financial aid, housing insecurity, disability accommodations, etc. And I guess I would just jump off this really quickly and say that this year I was working with somebody from Student Services on a project, and she just mentioned something very informally about students dropping courses, and that it was actually really detrimental to the student when they dropped, as opposed to getting an incomplete and then getting some way to finish up the course, even if it's later. And I had no idea about that, or withdrawal, like it was specifically about withdrawals. And I had no idea about that. I had received very bad advice as a student that I thought was good advice, and so she was able to kind of lay out some of the ramifications for students about that. I had no idea. So striking up a close relationship with your general advisors and counselors can really, informally in those relationships, you can find out a lot of information in a contextualized way that will really benefit you and benefit students. And I did have to do a little grief work of my own to realize, like, oh my gosh, I spent 10 years giving students really bad advice. That was really painful. In fact, a lot of times when I'm brushing my teeth in the morning, I'll think of something that I know now because I've been in this position that I learned that really made me, that, I don't know, I'll just think of students that I wish I had done differently by. So again, forging those relationships with advisors or counselors is really beautiful and can be really beneficial professional development. In regards to if you should ask to switch to another discipline, she says that she can't answer that because she doesn't know your college context or if that's an available option. But I would recommend that you talk to your direct supervisor about this and you just say, hey, you know, what do you think I should do? But I think that if you stay advising in that field outside of your content area, and you follow these other steps that Lisa talked about, that this could be really good professional development for you, you know, in terms of knowing more about the full 360 of your institution, your role within it, and how you can better serve students. So those are the questions that people asked, and I have a few, I mean, I scheduled this till 3:30, and I'm happy to stay here. Are there any other questions or comments or thoughts? Again, I'll stay on the line for a little bit, but I did want to say thank you so much to those of you who submitted questions. I'll be sending out the recording of this Q&A along with the document and the transcript, which I am scared to read. And if you're watching this recording, if you could comment on the Google Doc with clarifying questions, a request for more information, any feedback on how useful this answer was to you on a scale of 1 to 5, and you should be able to do that anonymously. So, you know, like I shouldn't be able to tell who wrote it, and I guess I'm just interested in your feedback about if this was useful. And we will be meeting next month, and Alyssa Sells, I'm going to add this to the Google Doc at the bottom before I forget, I'll just say join us next time and meet Alyssa Sells. Alyssa Sells is, she's a program administrator. I'm just typing this in real quick before I forget. Program administrator for faculty development in e-learning. And she is going to talk to us about the learning in the e-learning. And she's going to talk more about a variety of things, but in regards to that first question about where I talked about backwards design, she's going to give more specifics around how to do this. And a lot of the stuff that she'll talk about is transferable to face-to-face classrooms. It's really more about using technology in face-to-face environments and fully online and hybrid. So I'm really excited about that. Kelly wrote, this was very helpful. Thank you. She doesn't have any additional questions. Kelly, thank you. It's so weird to like talk into this. The next one will be formatted very differently. It won't just be a talking Jennifer head. Alyssa is going to make sure that it's super interactive because it'll be more content, or it'll be asking you to engage with the content. So thanks again, and I'm going to stop recording. And don't hesitate to reach out to me for anything.